going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and this is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And this week we are finally, it's only been over a month of us reviewing Kamigawa Neon Dynasty stories, but still not getting to episode 1. So here we are with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, the main story, episode 1, A Stranger in Eiganjo, by Akemi Dawn Bowman. My quick review at the top of this one, I thought this one was fine. I enjoyed it. You know, I'm not ranting and raving. It wasn't the best story I've ever read in my life, but it kept me entertained and interested. So, yeah, I think it's worth your time if you have the time, but I'm not saying stop what you're doing right now and go read it.
Okay.
I'm kind of in the middle.
I feel about the same about it. I will say, from a story perspective, it's probably kind of important. I don't know about that either, because
we'll talk about that, but yeah,
I mean, like, it talks about a lot of things, like, it goes into detail where all of the information that we had on these topics prior were just, sort of surface level. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so in other words, you knew basically every story beat and they that was about to occur. They just kind of wove it together a little bit better. So yeah, that's why I say, like, I enjoyed it, but it's not a must read in my opinion. Okay. But anyway, those are our quick reviews. If for whatever reason you have not gotten the chance to read this story yet and you would like to, or if you read it a long time ago, like when it came out, and you would like to refresh yourself on it before you watch this video, we try to remove as many barriers as possible. So instead of having to try to find it somewhere, the top link in the description down below will take you to the story itself so you can check it out and read it at your leisure. And then, of course, if you have not already, we would love it if you would come back here and continue and join us so that we can hear your opinions as well as ours. Right. Because that's kind of our favorite part about this, is that we share our opinions and our thoughts on the story, and then we look forward to hearing all of yours as well.
Yeah.
So definitely feel free to...
It's not just about us.
Exactly. And that's, we always say, that's what the comments down below are for. Any and all thoughts that you might have, that's where those go. And we appreciate those. We appreciate that from you as well. Before we get into the full review itself, just a reminder, hi, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being here. We really hope that you enjoy all the things that we put out here on this channel, as well as our other channels, linked down in the description box below as well. Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All are linked down there. But please don't forget, while you're on any of our channels, to subscribe and ring that bell. It is totally free. You can unsubscribe at any time that you feel that we're not putting out stuff that you're interested in. And it gets you notifications so that you will find out whenever any of our videos come out, and whenever we go live, which will be on this channel every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, where Mondays we play MTG Arena, usually limited, but you know, as it gets towards the end of a season, sometimes that doesn't always work out. And on Fridays, we play whatever video game we happen to be doing at the time. Right now, we are working our way through X-Men Legends 2 for the PlayStation 2, the original. I mean, the original. It's X-Men Legends 2. But anyway, no like remastered version or anything like that.
It's on the PlayStation 2.
Yep. Load screens, glitches, and etc. But we would love it if you would join us for any and all of those streams. We have an absolute blast with the folks that do join us. You're all amazing people, and it's a ton of fun. So we encourage you to be there. But yeah, I think that's it for that kind of stuff. And thank you sincerely for any and all support that you're willing to give for anything that you watch of ours. By the way, don't forget, likes and shares go a very long way, and we really appreciate it. But on to the full review itself. This story started, and I don't know whether it was intentional or not. I feel like it was, because, you know, I don't feel like I was in that mindset when I started reading the story. But this story started to me like a Studio Ghibli film.
Oh.
There was a lot of talk of food, and like descriptions of food, which Studio Ghibli is very known for, as well as... the water kami that like popped out of the water, and like Kaito was afraid that it was gonna lecture him on like what he was or wasn't doing or what he was supposed to be doing, and then instead it just kind of grabbed a dish, went back below the water, and went to go clean the dishes. And it just, not exactly in the same way, of course, it's kind of the opposite, but it reminded me of Calcifer from Howl's Moving Castle, if you're familiar, with the log and, like, you know, putting the log on the fire himself. And
he eats the eggshells and everything so he can power the house.
Yeah. So that's just what it made me think of. I got very strong Studio Ghibli vibes at the start of this story. Again, intentional or not, that's just how I felt when I read it, and I appreciated it. I thought it was pretty cool. Then
that's much better than I felt about the food thing, because they kept on talking about food, and I was like, okay, I feel like in the last story, Kaito was like a prominent character. He was like the main character, and then I feel like at the beginning of this story, I was sitting there going, okay, is he like the sidekick that always eats and like doesn't get anything done?
That's right, you did mention that.
And, and then kind of, right? Because he's kind of like his sister's sidekick in the beginning, you know, until his sister's like, yeah, I gotta move on.
Yeah, we can't stay here forever, right?
And then he's kind of the emperor's sidekick until he's not that anymore, and
then he kind of comes into his own, I guess, at that point. But then that's a different story for a different time. But yeah, interesting. Kaito talks about the fact that he feels towards the beginning like he's invisible because the Imperials are so much more focused on other things, and so even though he's kind of doing the wrong thing, he's able to kind of move about and do his own thing despite that, or in spite of that fact. Because, as he mentions, the Imperials are more focused on kind of their regulations of technology and checking to make sure that the Futurists are being put in check, which, again, just further cements the fact that we always talk about, which is that your Planeswalker's Guide should come out before your stories do. Because, like, sure, I guess that aspect, you would read it and you'd be like, oh, okay, I guess these Futurists are people that... But, like, you wouldn't get, like, the whole caste system aspect of it, where, like, you know, where it's, like, the elite lording over the people that are just trying to do technological advancements unfettered, so to speak. And then Kaito gets into that discussion later in this story, kind of saying, like, listen, people deserve to have these technological advancements, but if they can't afford the permits, they can't do it, right? And so you're just holding these people back, like, arbitrarily because they can't afford the permits. And so the only people who are allowed to have technological advancements are the ones who can afford it. People are dying, which we'll talk about it more later, but, you know, I've never heard anything like that before.
Well, I love that you mentioned the caste system because I feel like it's just another way that they kind of pair the old with the new in these stories, where they're taking, like, feudal Japan and meshing it with, you know, current technology or futuristic technology, really.
Yeah.
So it's really cool.
Yeah, and so, but I guess for people who weren't here last week, first of all, you can go check out last week's video where we reviewed the Planeswalker's Guide to Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, but we always say with the Planeswalker's Guides that they should come out before the stories do, and they should be on the story page or accessible through the story page so that you can read about the information of the plane before reading the stories, because it gives you the proper background and context for the things that you're going to be reading about in the main stories that are otherwise kind of talked about like you understand them already, which you don't if you haven't read the Planeswalker's Guide. And at the time that this story...
Or at least not to the extent that they would want you to, because... It's in the Planeswalker's Guide.
But at the time that this story came out originally, Planeswalker's Guide hadn't been released. So, okay, I mean, like, now, we're doing it now, like I said, over a month later, sure, Planeswalker's Guide has come out, but the people who read this story day of release did not have that benefit. And having that background is so much more helpful. And it's not even, like, there are certain aspects of stories where you want that to be a little bit shadier, and you're like, what the hell's going on there? I don't quite understand. So that then later on you can read another story or the Planeswalker's Guide and go, oh! But, like, that's not what this is, I feel like. You know what I mean? Like, it's not...
It's the The Planeswalker's Guide is a baseline. It's a foundation of information that you need to know going in.
Yeah, it teaches you about all the individual groups of people, their motivations, their conflicts with one another, or comparisons to one another.
In a broad picture sense.
Yes, big time.
So when you read the sort of minutia of these stories first, you're not provided with that foundational context beforehand.
Yep.
And it's stupid.
But so that's our point behind, like, you know, have it be a link on your story page. Have it come out before the stories. Like, give us that baseline context. It doesn't spoil any aspect of the story at all, because even after having read that, we didn't say, oh, well, Kaito is going to be the one who's going to be calling out the imperialists of their treatment of the futurists. Like, how the hell would we know that from the Planeswalker's Guide? We wouldn't. So putting it out first doesn't spoil any part of your story. It doesn't, like, take away from this story being told or anything, but it does take away from folks' reading of this story if the Planeswalker's Guide isn't out first, because there's aspects that they don't understand that are not payoffs for later, where you get that moment that we were just talking about. So
it's the kind of thing where they read these stories, they pretty much understand what's going on, and then a month later when the Planeswalker's Guide comes out, they read it and go, oh, okay, yeah, I think I remember these guys. All right. If
they're conscious of it at all, and if they read the Planeswalker's Guide at all, right? Like, that's just kind of how that works. We have some quotes that we always, not always, but that we tend to write down if we find that they're important. So a bunch of the quotes are for Amy to talk about, or that you at least wanted to initiate talking about. But this one I wrote down for myself as well. Quote, "It was forbidden for the Emperor to reveal her name, even to those closest to her." Or is that something that you said as well, or is that just me?
I was weirded out by it, because they didn't explain why.
So, right.
Or at least I felt like they didn't.
I agree that they did not, yes. So, it seems to me, without explanation, just like a nod to, like, you know, she calls herself the Wanderer to random planeswalkers that she meets, because she's used to not being able to reveal her name to people. And it's like, okay, I get it. You, Akemi, Dawn Bowman, and the current story team did not write that aspect of her character, but have now attempted to resolve it and explain it away to a degree. It kind of works, I suppose. Maybe. But, yeah, it at least, like, gives us the idea of why. But I also wrote down, the quote was, "It was forbidden for the Emperor to reveal her name, even to those closest to her." Wouldn't those closest to her know her name?
Already know it?
Like, I mean, I guess I imagine those closest to her being, like, parents, siblings. Like, they would know your name.
They mean, like, relationships with people going forward.
I guess. Well, and again, obviously this is in the context of Kaito, because Kaito becomes friendly with her, at first not knowing who she is at all, but still forming that relationship, and then afterwards, him asking her name and not getting a response, or getting, you know, being told that she can't, but still...
Getting a fake name.
Yeah, and a fake number.
I called your number. It wasn't you.
Yeah, super funny. So yeah, there was that. I find that weird, but I get... If that is just in there to explain away why we never heard her name, I guess. I'm okay with it, because I get what was going on. It's flimsy, but it's not your fault, right? Like, you didn't make that decision for her character, and now you want to flesh out her character more.
I don't agree with that. I think that they needed to flesh that out more, if that was the reason behind it. If the reason is a cultural thing, then maybe they don't need to, because they figure that anyone who cares enough about that will do the research and find out.
Okay. I will say...
already knows it.
I will say that I agree with you, though, that if there is more context to be had, I hope that we get it.
Yeah.
In the future.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to skip that one and come back to it later. Here's a quote that you wanted to discuss. "I wasn't born an Imperial, but this is my home now. Even as he said it, the words felt wrong. How could something true still feel so much like a lie?
Yeah. I wanted that quote because...
Because it's a good one?
So I grew up in an abusive home, and that just very much speaks to that kind of a thing, right? It's sort of this it's your home because it's the only home you have, right? Not because it is what a home is, right? Which is unconditionally accepting of you and loving and warm, and just, I don't know, what is a home? It's
safety.
Right. A refuge that you want to go back to after a long day.
Yeah.
Or whatever. So I get it. This is his home because it's where he lives, and it's where he grew up, and it's got all the people that he loves there because everyone else is gone.
Yeah, I was going to say, except his parents, but yes, since they have passed. Good point, yeah.
But he doesn't belong there. And he knows he doesn't belong there.
And he's told he doesn't belong there.
And he's treated like he doesn't belong there.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not really fair how he's treated. And the more that he learns that and experiences what it could be elsewhere, you know, the further away from him feeling like he's telling the truth when he calls it home, he's gonna get. So.
And I think it goes along with this other quote that you asked to write down. But the words needed to come out. Maybe it was better Kaito is giving them to a stranger.
Yeah, I wanted you to write that one down because...
I like it. It's cool.
For me, it's a lot easier talking about that kind of stuff to a camera, to a stranger, or to people who you know have lived through the same sort of thing. Because there's a lot less judgment, there's a lot less expectation. It's just a much more level playing field. You know, when you're telling someone who doesn't know you from Adam, or who basically doesn't, you don't care what they think of you, right? Because they're out of nowhere. Yeah. They're a stranger. So if you never see them again, you never see them again, right? And so there's a lot less strings attached to being vulnerable with that person, because you know that, you know, at the end of this, you know, encounter, you never have to talk to them again if you don't want to. You know, you can, but if you don't want to, you won't have to. So it makes it a lot easier to enter into something like that, because you're giving something important up, but, you know, to them. But if there's kind of no stakes in them receiving it, right?
Sure. So. Yeah. That's and again, just a cool quote. Very good insight on it. I appreciate that. This isn't a quote. It's more of a summarization of this particular section. But I thought I was a little bit. I appreciated the story of Kaito's parents, of how he lost them. I mean, it's super sad, right, and tragic as hell. But I appreciated learning that information and finding that out. What I hated was that it was followed by him saying he'd already lost his parents. he would never lose anyone else ever again. And it was like, ew.
I mean, yes, you will.
Well, and but that's the point, I think. So I think that's the setup for, like, he's going to lose the Emperor, and so he's going to constantly look for the Emperor until he has her back again. So, like, sure, I guess, but, like, it was like, it was so cliched, and it, like...
So the storyline is, this person has a lot of grief, they haven't worked through it, they don't know what to do. They've been abandoned by everyone that they've ever loved, essentially, and... what next?
Yeah.
What next is you just keep going and hope for the best, I guess. And, you know, in that situation, if you're that stuck on it, then you're gonna just obsess about making sure that you don't lose the people that you still have left, or that if you have, you stop at nothing to get them back.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily healthy.
Yeah. I wrote it here because it was talked about here. Here's this part of the story is where Kaito kind of has his big, like, blow up with Light Paws. And kind of, I was talking about it earlier, yells at her and says, like, you're killing people. Like, these people that can't afford these permits or whatever aren't getting the benefits of these amazing technological advances that we have because you people are regulating them so heavily because you're so afraid of advancement and change. And doesn't quite say it, but again, as we know through the Planeswalker's Guide and through our allegories to the real world, it just makes it so that it's harder to assert control over your populace or to kind of make sure that you are up here and everybody else is down here in whatever that may mean for you or for them. But, and so Kaito's kind of pointing out the hypocrisy there and the nonsense with that.
Right, because Light Paws is sitting there going, we need to, you know, keep balance. And it's like, okay, you know, I think I had you write down, or maybe you didn't write it down, but, you know, he started talking about equality. You know, that's balance.
Yeah. Yeah, that was from that rant or from that speech, yeah.
And that control that they've decided they're going to take of the technology is just reinforcing that caste system that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And forcing people to have to, you know, sort of revolt and and be not loyalists.
Yeah, I forget what they're called, the separatists or whatever that there's a name for them, starts with an R, that they assumed Tezzeret was. And even Light Paws kind of uses that opportunity, again, either in a corrupt way or just in a flat-out ignorant way, right? To say, well...
to scapegoat somebody.
Yeah, because at first they thought, again, I'm sorry, I don't remember the name. I know it starts with an R. But I might have it back here, but I'm not going to go crazy if I can't find it.
My ear keeps on turning around.
Reckoners. Right? No? No. Anyway, it's separatists or whatever, like we were talking about. That particular group, that's who they originally think that Tezzeret is. And then because Kaito is speaking up and saying, no, it wasn't them. I saw them. He had a metal arm. He looked really weird. And Light Paws kind of goes, huh. Then it was the Futurists. And it's like, no. I mean, I get it that you have it out for the Futurists. And I get why you have it out for the Futurists, but...
Well, I mean, that was, in my mind, all that was just a tactic to make Kaito understand, no, you aren't siding with the Futurists, you're siding with us.
Yeah.
And that's because the Futurists are bad. When in reality, all that did was make him go, yeah, no, you're just not listening to me, it's not the Futurists, and you're wrong.
Yeah, and I think
about
it was...
everything.
I think that's fair. I think it seemed to me to even be a bit of just, like, right place, wrong place, right time or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, where Lightpaws kind of saw that opportunity and was like, I needed something to get these futurists for. And now we have it. We have a description that sounds like something the futurists could do. Like, we could spin it in that direction. Right. So we're going to do that. Because we don't know who this is. He's some rando, seemingly, at least according to Kaito, who I don't think Lightpaws has a reason to believe that Kaito's lying, although maybe Lightpaws truly feels that Kaito has really been corrupted by the talk of the futurists or whatever. And so Lightpaws is just saying, to herself, you're just trying to divert attention away from the futurists, so I'm going to divert it back. But my initial opinion was kind of more sinister than that, which was just that Lightpaws was like, well, we don't know who this is, but sure sounds like futurists, and that would check them off my list, of things I have to justify dealing with or whatever.
My thought was still very sinister, but not from a perspective of you and I just had this conversation. You're fucking off somewhere because you've just basically told me I'm a murderer, and now I'm gonna get you back, and this is how I'm doing it, involving so many more people than is necessary, and doing it by scapegoating somebody and all of those things, because those are the things that are typical for me as a corrupt politician to do. And then it's just a plus now that in this particular situation, it's to get back at you as well for basically just telling me that you're on the side of the futurists instead of our side.
So I'll correct you only slightly in case this changes what you were saying. I do not think, if I recall correctly, I do not think that he decided to leave until after she called him out.
No, I don't mean physically leave, okay. But I mean leave
those ideals or whatever.
Thoughts
sure.
And practices behind from a just a philosophical standpoint.
Sure.
About that.
Sure. Okay, so two last things that I wanted to talk about that were things that kind of bothered me a little bit about this one. Not like, I don't know, you can gauge how bothered I am by how animated I get about it.
Okay.
Because I don't want it to be like it didn't bother me, and then 2 minutes later I'm like, this is so dumb, what,
Yeah.
So, anyway. The first thing was, we see Tezzeret, and we see Kaito chasing Tezzeret across the rooftops, which just is Kaito's pursuit. That's a card that exists. Right. I believe, I'm almost certain it's a story spotlight card, like 99% sure. But just in case I'm wrong, I don't want to just flat out be like, it is, but I'm relatively certain it is. But we don't see the art in this story for Kaito's pursuit. Maybe we'll see it later. I doubt it. But with issues that we've had with these stories in the past few recent sets, where a story spotlight moment occurs, the art for that story spotlight is shown, and it has very little to nothing to do with what's actually going on in the story at the time, except that it's like a random image of the people that are vaguely present at the time, right, and they look entirely different than they would look in that particular situation. This was seemingly a perfect opportunity because the art is fine. It's Kaito chasing Tezzeret across the rooftops at night, which is just exactly what happened. And it's a cool art, and it's a cool story beat, and it's just not shown as art in the story. Is it possible that it'll show up in the next one? Maybe. Does that make sense? Probably not, unless maybe he's telling that to somebody. I was chasing this guy across the rooftops, and so then they show the image. I guess that's a way to save it.
I don't think it's going to happen.
I don't either, but it sure does bother me, because it's you're okay with putting up the pictures that have very little to do except in the name, right, with the event that's actually occurring. But then when the event that you have a perfect picture for is there, I guess because you had the Kyodai image, which is phenomenal, by the way.
Amazing.
That you wanted to show off, you then don't show the Kaito's pursuit because of it. which seems very silly to me.
Stupid.
But anyway, so that was...
both.
Yeah, exactly. Why not have them that close to each other? You had a massive gap, which I'm not even complaining about, right? But you had a massive gap in the middle of the story to the end of the story with no art whatsoever, and then you had the Kyodai art, and that was kind of the end of it. But like,
maybe they did have Kaito's pursuit. I'm sorry. Am I calling that right?
Yeah, Kaito's pursuit.
Yeah.
You got it. Yeah.
Maybe they did have that picture there, and then it just never loaded.
I mean, I assume it would have had something there.
Work.
I don't know.
Like one of those little squares.
Yeah, but it the little X through it. It definitely was not there. Thankfully, that aspect of it. But anyway, so there was that, and then last but not least, because I mentioned this to Amy slightly beforehand. So, let's talk about timeline, shall we?
Yeah.
So we are reviewing this story.
Like, oh my god, what is he going to say? I don't remember what he's talking about.
I said it took us a month to get to this point.
Yeah.
Why? Because we did the saga stories first in 2 videos, because there were 10 of them, or 11 or whatever.
But they were really short.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So we combined a bunch of 5 and then 6 or something like that. And then we did the Kaito origin stories 1 and 2, then the Planeswalkers guide, and now this, episode 1. So you would think, right, with the saga stories telling ancient stories, ancient times, even into like the modern age technically talks about now, but it broadly talks about now. Okay. Then you have the Kaito origin stories, which are flashback stories. They're supposed to be. That's how they're built, right?
Prequels,
Kaito, yeah, exactly. Kaito origin stories. So this, being episode 1, should be further in the future / present time than the Kaito origin stories, right? No.
But it's not.
No. And okay, so here's where my head was at, right? The first part of the story, I'm reading through it, and I'm like, okay, it's Kaito, it's his sister. Like, while we're reading all of that, it absolutely, and light pause. While we're reading all of that, it absolutely could have been post-Kaito origin stories still. The Emperor could have been gone, Kyodai could have been having trouble with herself in the chamber or whatever. We had none of that yet. Right. Then we find out, no, he's an actual child meeting with the Emperor for the first time ever, and then they show the When We Were Young art where they are children.
Right.
Like, actual children. And then the, like, moonfolk guy who, like, comes to visit and who he gets his origami crane drone thing from, calls him a kid, and he's like, I'm not a kid, which is what a kid says.
Right.
So he's just actually a kid.
Right.
It's just...
So definitely is. Okay.
But when we see him in Kaito origin stories, the Emperor's already gone. So while I'm reading this, I'm like, okay, so they're gonna do like this is how he meets her, this is when she disappears, and this is him post the Kaito origin stories where he is now. Right. And that's how the story's gonna end, which is why it's episode 1. Nope. The story ends before the events of the Kaito origin stories. Either of them. Because there are 2. Either of them. So this is Kaito origin story number 1, but it's also episode 1. So, like, depending on what episode 2 is, it's possible that, like, the timeline of these stories goes, like, all the saga stories, then Kaito, or then episode 1, then Kaito origin story 1 and 2, then episode 2, and 3 and 4 and 5. Like, it's like, why?
It's ridiculous.
You had Kaito origin stories. This is blatantly a Kaito origin story. It's arguably more of a Kaito origin story than the Kaito origin stories.
Yep. So why isn't this an origin story?
Like, I wrote, you know, it could be, why wasn't this called Kaito origin story number 3? And then I was like, but it would be Kaito origin story number 1. Right? Like, it would be like Star Wars-y, right, where, like, they released...
Star Wars.
Yeah, they released, like, episodes 2 and 3, and then episode 1 of the story is actually episode 1 of the origin stories. Like, Why? Because then presumably, hopefully, next week when we get to episode 2, we're going to read it and be like, oh, cool, now we're in the present. Why? Why was it so... Because then it goes to what we were kind of alluding to at the beginning. Nothing that happened here was a surprise. Oh, Tezzeret's here? Cool, I already read the Kaito origin stories. That even if we hadn't done these so late in time compared to when they were released, the Kaito origin stories were released in like mid-December 2021, and these stories, the main stories, were released like early January 2022. So they came out before chronologically regardless. Right. So every bit of this story, besides the minutia, right, the big bullet points of he's not with the Imperials anymore, he's not with his sister anymore, the Emperor is missing, Kyodai is messed up, and Tezzeret was there. We knew all of that going in.
Right. And not only is he not with his sister anymore, but he also, like, didn't say goodbye. He just kind of left because he had to. Right. And then, you know, didn't get back in touch with her like he should have. Until
Kaito origin story, where he then meets back up with her again, and there's that moment of, like, haven't seen you in a while. And it's like, that would probably be pretty cool if we had read this one first.
Right.
But, again, even if we had done it as soon as it came out, the origin story still came out well before this one did. So it just blows my mind. It doesn't make sense. Except that the Emperor exists in this story, I suppose. Like, you get to, like, hear her dialogue, sort of. And so, like, I guess because the Wanderer is present in the story, it has to be the main story for some reason.
As opposed to a Kaito story.
Because you can't have, like, your main Planeswalker for the set be in a side story, I guess. Maybe. Like, it truly doesn't make sense. But I'm trying to find something.
Yeah. Why can't you just call them origin stories as opposed to Kaito origin stories? And start with this one.
Sure.
And then do the other ones.
Or like flashback stories. Like, they don't have to be origin stories. Because Kaito origin stories, I guess, make sense. But then again, the name Kaito origin story would be so much more appropriate for this, because it depicts the origin of how he gets to how he is in the origin stories.
Right. Exactly.
I just, like...
It's absurd.
Yeah. So that was super frustrating, because I'm reading through it and I'm like, okay, they're eventually going to get to a point after the stories that we've already read, right? They have to, because otherwise this would just be part of the origin stories. And then it just never does.
Right.
And so I'm sitting there just scratching my head. I'm like, what's happening? Why is this not part of the origin stories? I don't get it. Because, again, besides tying it all together, which, again, we said that we liked it, right? It was well written, and it provided better context for the things that we already knew, but you spoiled it all a month prior in your Kaito origin stories. I just don't get... Like, you know, story spotlight cards spoil the story. Right? That's just how it works, because it's been a while since we've talked about it, but it would be so much cooler if the stories could come out first, and then you could read see the story spotlight cards and go, oh, cool, that's the depiction of that story beat. I remember that. Mm-hmm. That's awesome to be able to do that. But no, or when the story spotlight cards were previewed with the story. Like, the story would come out and that card would be previewed because they'd be coming out during preview season or whatever. Not a chance anymore, and I'm not sitting here like hardcore advocating for it. Like, if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. There's nothing I can do about that.
Well, clearly they don't, but I think it would be a lot more beneficial to them if they did.
Look, at this point, I'd just like them to come out like on a more meaningful basis that makes sense, as opposed to 5 of your stories in 4 days. Like, that's just really dumb, and I dislike it a lot. But anyway. We've talked about that before. I'm not going to get into that again.
Yeah, they really need a marketing person who knows what they're talking about.
But Amy, marketing would imply that they would make money off of it, and they've already said that they don't make money off Magic Story, and so they don't like caring about it for that reason.
They could make money off of it if they realized that releasing the story in a logical manner would actually get people to buy the cards.
You don't know what you're talking about. You didn't go to business school.
No.
I mean, I didn't go to business school, and that makes perfect sense to me, but, you know, who the hell am I, right? No, who the hell am I? Anyway, so, as always, right, we're talking about this stuff, we're giving our opinions. We truly want your feedback as well. Do you disagree? Do you feel like we're being too picky, or we're not really understanding the point? I would love to hear from you if you disagree. We're not looking for a fight. We're not looking for an argument.
No.
We're looking for different perspectives. Because to me, what I've just said makes perfect sense. Like, why the hell isn't it origin story number 1? Why is it main story number 1, and then story 2 is going to go into what happened after the origin? Like, it seems really dumb to us.
They're just always, like, meandering around instead of just going in a straight line.
Yeah. So if it makes sense to you and you get
it's like it's on purpose to take longer or to be weirder. I don't know.
I don't either.
Like, the shortest distance between A and B is a straight line.
Yeah. And again,
they're just...
Yeah. And again, you're not...
Couldn't be wavier.
No, and you're not like... There was nothing surprising in this story where you had to tell the other stories first because you needed the context from those stories to understand these. No. In fact, quite the opposite. Like, then you wouldn't have needed as much explanation in the Kaito origin stories because... Or what ended up being the Kaito origin stories, because you would have had this one as the context from the week before or earlier on in the same article. Because the article had the 2 stories in it, like, split it up into 2 separate ones, put this one at the beginning, like, it just... Anyway, that all makes sense to me, but, as I was implying, if it doesn't make sense to you, I want to know. I want to know what you think and why, because maybe it will help me change my mind. Maybe I've changed your mind, and you can let me know that, or we've changed your mind, you can let us know that in the comments down below. Whatever it is that you feel, and as always, if there's something that we didn't talk about that you kind of keyed in on, we want to know that too.
Yeah. Maybe they're trying to be artsy with it, and they're like, you know, when like TV shows show you like the final scene, and then you go back to the beginning, and then you see how you get to that final scene.
Sure,
but that would even make more sense than what they're actually doing here.
Except that when they do that, why do they do that? Because that scene is suspenseful. You're like, oh my god, what's going to happen next? And then they cut away and go 3 weeks ago or whatever, right? And so you see that, and so you're like, oh god, now I have to know how they get to that point and then what happens later.
Well, you don't think that, you know, Kaito running to the temple and then finding that Kyodai is not there, it's, you know, an imposter, is suspenseful?
What do you mean it's an imposter?
Well, it's an imposter, but it's not really an imposter. It's the Earth, not Earth, but non-spirit realm born Kami.
Well, that was the end of the first Kaito origin story, which then you just scroll slightly and it begins the second Kaito origin story, which then takes you to the end of that story.
I forgot that It's
just the same article. It's just like right there. Like the first story ends and the second one's right there. And so you just scroll down a little bit more. So yes, your point is very valid, but also they shot themselves in the foot by closing that story up in a neat bow at the end and being like, well, we're done, and then and then story 1 comes out, and it's like, oh, by the way, all that stuff that we like hinted about having it that it happened. Here you go. Here it is. What? Yeah. When you do what you were talking about, and you show that other scene, it's that big, impactful moment where you're like, I need to know how that happened, so I am going to sit through the rest of this, right? I don't recall the name of the principal. And I apologize. But there's a concept in movies where in the first, like, 15 minutes of a movie of that type, you need, like, a gun or violence or sex to, like, draw the person in, and then you can get to the rest of your story, right? You can introduce your characters and etc., but you need that hook to get people hooked, because then they're interested in your story from then on. Again, if you remember the name of the principal, as always, leave it in the comments below. Yeah. Thank you. But there's it's that idea of like, grab your audience early, hold their attention, and then you can get to what some might consider the boring stuff.
Right.
of like character development and etc. So that's a way to do that, is to show a suspenseful scene from later in the movie where you think that someone's going to die, or they're missing, somebody's missing, or there's a bomb counting down or whatever. Like, whatever it happens to be, and then it cuts away and it's like 3 weeks ago, you know, something like that. That is your moment where you're interested. So that is when that could have occurred, but that's 100% not what happened here.
Right.
They just told you everything that was going to happen in this story, in the Kaito origin stories, waited 2 or 3 weeks, and then gave you this story, and you read it, and you're like, okay, so what new information did I achieve here?
Right.
None? Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, the way they do this, it's very hard to think that they want people to continue reading. And I've said this before, and maybe it's a tinfoil hat kind of moment, but it feels like they're trying to get rid of us. It feels like they're trying to alienate the people who read the stories so that they don't have to bother making them anymore. It feels like they're like, okay, so first they pulled all kinds of bullshit that was just straight up rude, and now they're pulling stuff where it's a lot more subtle, but they're basically like, well, if we take away any interest that they have in reading it, they won't come back.
See, I personally wouldn't go that far. I don't think you're crazy or anything, right? I wouldn't personally go that far, but I do think that it's just a true, like, lack of, it feels like a true lack of care and interest in general. And so you just leave it to whoever the hell feels like they're willing to do it, and they just do it however they think is right, and it just doesn't make any sense. Like, it reeks to me, it reeks of a person who never asked anybody else what they think, right? They're just like, I'm going to do it this way. And that's what makes sense to me.
But the thing is, it doesn't make sense to anyone. The way that they do it doesn't make sense to anyone, and it happens every single time. So, like, it feels deliberate.
Yeah.
Because it feels like even the randomest person out of nowhere would think that the sequence makes sense to be sequential, as opposed to all out of order.
Yeah. With no other reason behind making it all out of order. Yes, which we just talked about. So, anyway, as we have alluded to, we would love to know from you what you think.
Right.
Do you agree? Do you disagree? And why? That's what the comments down below are for. Come and join us on a stream and talk to us about it. We would love to continue the conversation there as well. Mondays and Fridays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, as I said. Don't forget that. But yeah, that is going to be
even on the Friday stream where we're not doing Magic the Gathering.
Yeah,
I would love to talk about Forthos stuff with you.
I'll run around as Iceman and blast people with waves of ice, and we can talk about Kaito and Tezzeret and the Wanderer and whoever you want. So, thank you so much for watching our show. We really hope that you enjoyed it. Again, joining in on these discussions, if you agree with us, if you disagree with us, and sharing your own tinfoil hat conspiracies is all of the above, is a great way for all of you to join us as we show off our...
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right. That's the only reason why we do it, right? We still enjoy it, right? We're not sitting here like, we hate it, this sucks, I can't believe we're doing it again. Like, no, we still appreciate what's trying to be done, and we would love for all of you to join in with us in that discussion and etc. And hopefully, if it truly is something that to us makes no sense, to you makes no sense, maybe it gets seen, right? I'm not making any promises or giving any hints here, right? It's just a hope. Maybe it gets seen by the right people who can make that positive change.
Something about it.
If they feel like it needs to be changed, right? Because again, other people could pipe up and be like, look, you guys aren't really being fair, X, Y, and Z, and that's also perfectly fine. Like, people are allowed to have different opinions on things. That's just kind of how it works. We've presented our opinions as best we feel, and we want to know what other people think. That's the whole point of the, go in the comment section. Like, yeah.
Do it up.
Yes. Speaking of leaving comments, it is a way to help the channel as well, right? We want the discussion. That's why we're asking. But yes, leaving comments helps the channel. Leaving likes and shares, like I mentioned, helps the channel a lot. And subbing and ringing the bell helps you out a lot because you're getting those notifications. So thank you all so very much for being here. Don't forget those other channels linked down in the description box below. Video Games for All, Gluten Free for All. Video Games for All, I seriously, some of the best stuff we've done on Video Games for All is coming out right now. So go sub over there and ring that bell. You won't regret it. Detroit Become Human, Final Fantasy VII, Pokemon Silver, like all of it is so incredible. Good. We've got more stuff coming.
The golden age of video games. Not that they all came out at the same time. I mean,
no, they did not.
It's a golden age for our channel because all of the video games coming out on that channel are so incredible all at once.
Yeah. So definitely check those out. We really appreciate it. But for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.